La agencia de noticias que te informa de todo lo que sucede en el mundo. Di no a la desinformación de los medios de comunicación.
Today, we're going to concentrate on Michigan. We're going to concentrate on the two lawsuits that have been filed. They are both very, very big cases. One in state court, one in federal court. And we're going to drill down, not the whole lawsuit, but we're going to drill down into the key witnesses, because the fake media is reporting over and over again, including Fox, that there is no evidence, hard evidence of fraud. There are thousands of pieces of evidence of hard fraud. They just don't publish it. They have an iron curtain. If you show them an affidavit signed by someone that says they observed fraud, they don't put it on. I mean, it's really incredible, but it isn't incredible. It's un-American. And the only way we get around it is by going around them, getting on OAN or Newsmax or local radio or some radio stations that are brave enough to publish this. And I know why they're doing it. I mean, they're doing it, some of it because of ideology and some of it because they're being threatened by sponsors. We've had people threatened with being thrown out of their law firms if they help us. I mean, that's for another day, but this is McCarthyism on steroids. This is making Nixon's enemies list look bad, but not as bad. This is probably the worst time in America for the exercise of your rights of free speech. The worst. This is not terribly different than what's going on in Venezuela. And very interestingly, you're going to see that Venezuela is involved in this voter fraud. But now we're going to go to Michigan. What happened in the state of Michigan? We filed a lawsuit several days ago, two of them, one in state court, one in federal court, one in Detroit and one in Lansing. And together they allege the following, that like Pennsylvania, Detroit was a cesspool of systemic corruption, that the Detroit Democratic machine, which has its own issues of corruption, maybe as bad, maybe not as bad as Philadelphia, its own history of voter fraud, maybe not as legendary as Philadelphia, but still there, that they did essentially the same thing that Philadelphia. They excluded Republicans from being able to observe the mail-in ballots, the ballots that were so disputed, the ballots that were new to this election. We never had that before. We had absentee ballots, but not you could just mail in. And we never had so many mail-in ballots to deal with. Michigan set up a lawful procedure for doing that. Critical to the lawful procedure, of course, was the inspection by both parties. Because what I think you have to understand about a mail-in ballot, unlike a ballot in a machine or even a ballot on paper that's submitted and then it is checked on the voter roll, once that envelope that sends in the ballot is discarded, you can no longer verify it. The verification takes place on the spot. And from time immemorial, when absentee ballots are counted, the city or state worker sits in the middle, has the ballot. On one side is a Republican, the other side a Democrat, liberal, conservative, whatever. They pull out the envelope. They all look at the envelope. They see whether all the identifying data is there. They see if it looks good or suspicious. If it looks good, they take it. They open the envelope. Inside is another envelope sealed to preserve the privacy of your vote, and it's put in the vote pile to be counted. And the envelope is put over there. And basically now you can no longer verify. They've become separated from each other and mixed up within 1 million votes. In this case, there was no Republican. Rarely was there even a Democrat. A couple of times you'll see there were 2 Democrats and no Republican. No Republican got to see that. We've shown in Pennsylvania that we can count now up to 628,000 votes were unlawfully cast that way. And now in Michigan, we're well over 300,000 and we've just begun to count. But I want to drill down now into there's no evidence they say, of voter fraud. And I want to show you an affidavit in the state case that's been filed that has been incorporated by reference into the federal case. So it's part of both cases. This is I believe it's Exhibit B, and it's from a city worker. So this person is well, let me just read it. My name is Jesse Jacob. I'm an adult citizen and resident of the state of Michigan. I've been employed for the city of Detroit for decades. I want you to note at the end that it's sworn to. This is not just a letter. This is an affidavit, and if this person is lying, they go to jail for at least 5 years. Okay? Federal and state, because we submitted it in a federal lawsuit now. And she has no fear of that happening to her. Regular citizen, longtime employee of the city of Detroit. City of Detroit. I don't know if she's a Republican or a Democrat. I guess I'm going to assume she's a Democrat. Probably shouldn't, because it's Detroit. And 8 out of 10 are Democrats. She was assigned to work in the elections department for the 2020 election, and she received training from the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan regarding the election process. She worked at the headquarters for most of September, and then she started working at a satellite location for most of October. She processed absentee ballot packages to be sent to voters while I worked at the election headquarters in September 2020, along with 70 or 80 other workers. I was instructed by my supervisor, quote, to adjust the mailing date of these absentee ballot packages to be dated earlier than they were actually sent. First crime. Ordered to do it by her supervisor, a city worker. First fraud. First crime. The supervisor was making announcements for all workers to engage in this practice. So it wasn't individual, it was pervasive. At the satellite location, I processed voter registrations and issued absentee ballots for people to vote in person at the location. I directly observed on a daily basis City of Detroit election workers and employees coaching and trying to coach voters to vote for Joe Biden and the Democrat Party. Completely illegal. That's me. Editorial aside. She goes to say, I witnessed these workers and employees encouraging voters to do a straight Democrat ticket. I witnessed these election workers and employees going over to the voting booths with voters in order to watch them vote and coach them for whom to vote. During the last 2 weeks, while working at this satellite location, I was specifically instructed by my supervisor not to ask for a driver's license or a photo ID when a person was trying to vote. Gosh, let's not see if they're an illegal alien. Let's not see if they come from New York. Let's not see if they were sent over from Chicago, where they surely were going to win. So why waste time in Chicago? Come and vote in Detroit like they do from Camden to Philadelphia in almost every election. Where Democrat machines control a place, they cheat. And why wouldn't they? They steal. Why wouldn't they cheat? You don't have to guess at it. She's telling you that. Goes on, paragraph 10. I observed a large number of people who came to the satellite location to vote in person, but they had already applied for an absentee ballot. Gee, that's kind of strange. These people were allowed to vote in person and were not required to return the mailed absentee ballot or sign an affidavit that the voter lost the mailed absentee ballot. Encouraging them to vote twice. This is like, I voted early and often for Joe Biden and Harris because I was instructed to do so by the crooked Democrat Party of Detroit. Whenever I process an absentee voter application or in-person registration, I was instructed to input the person's name, address, and date of birth into the qualified voter file, QVF system. That means if they weren't registered, which means they weren't entitled to vote. She'd clean it all up by getting the vote and then putting the person's name in after the fact. That's also fraud. I don't know how many I've counted out. Four different acts of fraud being done by her and 70 to 80 other poll workers. You see how they're lying to you? The QV system can be accessed and edited by any election processor with proper credentials. I worked at the satellite location until the poll was closed and then completed the entry of all absentee ballots by 8:30. I then reported to the TCF Center, which becomes a Center for Corruption. It should be called the Voter Corruption Center. On November 4, 2020 at 8:30 a.m., I was instructed not to validate any ballots and not to look for any deficiencies in the ballots. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to look for deficiencies in the ballots. They didn't allow a Republican to look, and they also told the city worker, don't look. Normally, about 10% of the ballots are deficient. And every single one of these ballots that didn't have that inspection became, by virtue of that, under the law of Michigan, an unlawful ballot. One that shouldn't be counted, can't be counted. It's an illegal vote because it hasn't been inspected according to the new law that was passed. Absentee ballots that were received in the mail would have the voter's signature on the envelope. While I was at the TCF Center, I was instructed not to look at any of the signatures on the absentee ballots. And I was instructed not to compare the signature on the absentee ballot. The signature is there for the purpose of verifying. A Republican didn't get a chance to see that. And the city worker was told not to do it. Who cares if the signature is one thing and the signature is another thing and this person is voting 30 times, keeps coming in 30 times? We wouldn't know. That also is a crime. All absentee ballots that existed were required to be inputted into the system by 9 p.m. on November 3rd. That was required to be done in order to have a final list, et cetera, in order to have enough time to process the ballots. All satellites were instructed to collect the absentee ballots from the drop box once every hour on November 3rd, 2020. End time, 8 p.m., November 3, 2020. By the way, that's an order from Justice Samuel Alito of the United States Supreme Court. Doesn't matter who's Justice Alito. The crooked Democratic Party of Detroit's more important than Judge Alito or the Supreme Court, because on November 4, I was instructed to improperly predate the absentee ballots, to change the receive date, and to make it look that they had been received on or before November 3rd. I was told then to alter the information in the QVF to falsely show that the absentee ballots had been received in time to be valid. I estimate that this was done thousands of times. Then she signs on the penalty of perjury. You're telling me this wasn't pervasive fraud? That there's no evidence of pervasive fraud? I assume now that NBC, CBS, ABC, Twitter, Facebook, Times, Washington Post is aware of this. They'll put it on the front page. Ha! We might as well be in Venezuela or China or the old Soviet Union. Now we get to the second part. Of the affidavits. These are two affidavits. One is from Andrew Cito, a poll challenger, and the other is from Melissa Carone, an employee of Dominion Voting Services. Dominion Voting Services was the company that was selected to count the ballots. Very, very strange selection since they're a foreign company. It's going to turn out to be a very strange selection when you learn all the facts about Dominion Voting Services and who financed it and where the money came from and where these votes went so they could be manipulated. But that's not part of this direct case right now. That'll be another case. Let me tell you what these two together say. First, First, Melissa Carone, not an employee of anybody, not a political person, worked for Dominion Voting Services. She says, I witnessed countless workers rescanning the batches without discarding them first, which resulted in ballots being counted 4 or 5 times. This is in the TCF Center in Detroit, where basically 8 out of every 10 votes was for Biden. Except it wasn't 8 out of every 10. It was 8 out of 10 falsely magnified by 4 or 5 times. Over 400 ballots were scanned, had gotten blocked, which means one batch was counted over 8 times. This happened countless times while I was at the center. I confronted my manager, Nick Okonomakis, saying how big of a problem this was. Nick told me he didn't want to hear that we have a big problem. He told me we are here to assist with IT work, not to run their election. I guess they're there also not to be citizens of the United States and report crimes. I overheard numerous workers talking during shift change in which over 20 machines had 2 Democrats judging the ballots, resulting in an unfair process. Then we have the most interesting thing of all, that Mr. Cito and Ms. Carone both would observe at the same time. So let's go to Ms. Carone's version first. Sometime around 4 in the morning, there was 2 vans that pulled into the garage of the counting room. This is after most people had left and most Republicans had left because they thought it was over. The counting was over. And Trump was still ahead by about 130,000 votes, which they were extremely nervous about, say these witnesses. The 2 vans pulled up into the garage of the counting room. These vans appeared to be bringing food, but no food ever emerged from the vans. Instead, something like over 100,000 ballots came out of nowhere, not in the usual containers, in cardboard boxes, in bags, some of them falling out, and they're all thrown on a table. And it was announced that Michigan had discovered over 100,000 more ballots after they had counted all of the mail ballots. But 100,000 more were just discovered in the middle of the night. And when a worker, she observed, when a worker couldn't read it, or all they did is just throw it in, they didn't bother to observe it. They were just being thrown in. When there wasn't a name, the worker would sign the name of the person that the ballot belonged to, which is clearly illegal. There was a time I heard Samuel talking to Nick about losing tons of data. Ultimately, she called the FBI and made a report with them, and I was told I will be getting a call back. Needless to say, she didn't get a call back because this was overwhelming evidence of voter fraud by Democrats, not Republicans. Had it been Republicans, 10 FBI agents would have shown up immediately and seized the ballots. You know that. You know there's something seriously wrong with the upper echelon of our FBI. Now, just in case you don't believe her, even though she signed under penalties of perjury, why would a woman do that if it wasn't true? But there it is. And by the way, whether you believe it or not, it's evidence. They're lying to you when they say there's no evidence. This is evidence of systemic, pervasive voter fraud in the city of Detroit at such a level that it changed the numbers and made Biden the winner and not Trump. Because we can count out at least 320,000 votes that were unlawful and illegal, including the 100,000 that came in at 4:30 in the morning. And there are more witnesses to that, by the way. I just gave you the 2 under oath. There are more witnesses to what I told you, that it definitely happened. This is very powerful evidence. Thank you for returning, and let's get back to the evidence that the phony media says doesn't exist. Then we have the support for that from a gentleman by the name of Andrew Cito. Andrew was a poll challenger. He arrived at the TCF Center at 9:30 p.m. on November 3rd. He reported to the counting room, and he had no ability to be able to see any of the ballots being counted, nor would they allow him to see any of the ballots being counted, even though he was a certified poll watcher of the Republican Party. At approximately 4:30 p.m., now, similar to what she said, I thought everyone was going to go home as our shift had ended. There were two men in charge of the counting, one in his 30s and one in his 50s. At approximately 4:30, the man in his 50s got on the microphone and stated that another shipment of absentee ballots would be arriving and would have to be counted. Now, the count was all over. The guy announces, we got a few more ballots coming in. They had finished all the ballots they thought they had. It wasn't a few more ballots. There's 100,000 ballots. A few more ballots that come in at 4:30 in the morning. This is like Al Capone and this is like Al Capone and Prohibition. At approximately 4:30 a.m., sworn under oath by Mr. Cito, at approximately tens of thousands of ballots were brought in and placed on 8 long tables. Unlike the other ballots, these boxes were brought in from the rear of the room. Quite appropriate that they be brought in the back door, right? The same procedure was performed on the ballots that arrived at approximately 4:30 a.m., but I specifically noticed that every ballot I observed was cast for Joe Biden. Oh, wow. Wasn't that amazing? They thought they had finished counting. 100,000 ballots come in out of nowhere, sort of like it's Santa Claus and Christmas, except Santa Claus would never participate in a voter fraud. And they're all for Biden. And they have to make up 130,000 votes. And this is 100,000 votes. While counting these new ballots, I heard counters say at least 5 or 6 times that all 5 or 6 ballots, as they were counting through, were for Biden. All ballots that I sampled, heard, or observed were for Joe Biden. There was a shift change at 5 a.m. Whatever challenges were left, I decided not to leave and continue to monitor the ballot counting. Upon information and belief, the TCF Center was the only place where absentee ballots were being counted. I filled out 6 or 7 incident reports about what was happening at the TCF Center. Now, he was complaining vociferously about this, to no avail. At approximately 2 p.m., so now he stayed all the way until 2 p.m., on November 4, 2020, election officials covered the windows to the counting room with cardboard to block the view, against the law in Michigan. A little after 2 p.m., I exited the glass-enclosed room to take a break in the lobby area. When I tried to go back into the counting room, security guards refused to allow me back into the monitoring room to carry out my duties as a observer, credentialed observer. Previously, people could come and go freely into the counting room. Sworn to by Mr. Cito. 100,000 ballots at 4:30 in the morning? That's massive voter fraud. When you combine it with the votes that were counted without Republican observers, as the law required, we're talking about approximately 230 to 300,000 ballots that were unlawful, way beyond Biden's phony margin of victory. It sounds like, in fact, this is going to end up with Trump being pretty close to the 300, well, probably half the 300,000 that he had on the night of the election, which actually is what most mathematicians would tell you was the most they could have really reduced it if they did it legally. And the reason they had to rush in those 100,000 ballots, we can now show, is because they panicked. The Democrats didn't expect that he'd run that well. And then I want you to consider one other thing in conclusion. How is it that in 10 different Democrat-controlled cities, with crooked Democrat machines, with a long list of people that have gone to jail over the years, how is it that every single leader there woke up on the morning of November 3rd and said, we have this new mail process, and we're going to shut out the Republicans from observing? Even though whenever we do absentee ballots, we have to allow the Republicans to observe. And even though the law says we have to allow the Republicans to observe, we're going to take the risk of violating the law because we control these cities so much. But it was like the individual idea of the leader in Philadelphia and the one in Pittsburgh and the one in Detroit and the one in Milwaukee and the one in Minnesota and the one all the way out in Phoenix, Arizona, and Las Vegas, Nevada, and Atlanta, Georgia. They just came up with this on their own. We're going to shut out the Republicans? Or do you think this was a concerted plan executed by the Democratic National Committee and the crooked Biden campaign? Look, let's get real. Joe Biden plagiarized and cheated his way through law school. Joe Biden plagiarized and tried to cheat his way through his first presidential election. The Biden family and Joe have made millions, 30 to 40 million alone from China. And we have a text in which Hunter Biden says half of that goes to Joe. The man, sold himself so many times. Why wouldn't he cheat? The evidence is overwhelming, ladies and gentlemen. He stole an election. Now we have 2 states. Those votes have to go to Trump. We're going to move on now to Nevada. You don't think it's worse in Nevada? I already know it's worse in Nevada. Phoenix, Atlanta. We're not going to stop. We've been threatened. We've been told we can never get jobs. We've been told we can't be allowed in polite society. We've been told all kinds of things. I'm very proud of what we're doing. We're saving the integrity of the American electoral process, which has been trashed by a crooked leadership of the Democratic Party. And I want to say to Democrats, even those who voted for Biden, this isn't your fault. This isn't your fault. This is the leadership of your party. It got corrupted by Clinton, and it never got uncorrupted. And now they've become major world-class crooks. Stealing an election is nothing for these people. Nothing. They certainly stole the election in Detroit. They certainly stole the election in Pennsylvania. There were over 100 witnesses to that. And you're going to see the same thing is true in 5 other places. And then we're going to take a look at Dominion, and we'll show you how technologically they stole the election.